Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. Every December, LinkedIn News brings together dozens of big ideas from our network. The 2021 Seers were on target for things like the boon of women in leadership roles, but off when it comes to our prediction that the economy would go through a double dip recession in 2021. Joining me now to discuss is no one better than Karen Kimbrough. She's chief economist for us here at LinkedIn. Karen, welcome back to LinkedIn News Live.
Oh, thanks for having me, Caroline.
Happy Big Ideas Day, and it's so good to see you again. All right, let's just start with the hits and misses from our list this year. Thanksgiving is behind us, but in the name of humble pie, let's start with the misses here. We predicted that 2021 there was going to be a double dip recession. That didn't happen. Why?
Yeah, it didn't happen for a couple of reasons. One, we were already seeing too much momentum in the recovery from what was, by the way, just remember, one of the shortest recessions on record, a 2-month recession back in early 2020. So we were already recovering at a fast clip by the third calendar quarter of 2020. So it just seemed like the only way we were going to get a double dip would be if new variants of the virus really hamstrung us. And so far that hasn't played out.
And when you think back to where we were this time last year putting this list together, are you surprised that a double dip recession was something that we predicted? Or take us back then. Why was that something that we were so concerned about?
Well, one of the reasons that we were concerned about it was it just seemed that there was an awful lot of upheaval. And there was a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty generally just begets paralysis in terms of the economy. But what we have to remember, what made this different, this recession was so unique. It was super short. It was also a recession beget of what you might just call an external shock. There was nothing fundamentally wrong with the US economy. And so there was no real need for us to restructure it as a result of the recession. If you wind back, 10 years, 15 years, when we had the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, there were some fundamental imbalances that had to be restructured and worked out. That's a different type of shock to our economy. And that's why that recovery was so long. If you look at where we are now, the amount of work that we've made or progress we've made in terms of jobs in the last year and a half, not even 2 years, is what we saw only after 9+ years.
Well, good news and 2021 really aren't synonymous, but we do see some silver linings on this list. Let's go to some of the hits. I think we had 67% of our big ideas proved out to be correct this year, which is a record high for us here at LinkedIn News. One of the hits was that we were going to see more entrepreneurs. Walk us through why this pandemic led to more people wanting to start a business.
It was so interesting. And by the way, it was a good call. Normally, when we have a recession, one of the things we see is that people do strike out on their own at a slightly higher rate. And that's what we saw at this recession. And particularly, there were some extra factors that made that even more of a great call. One, people spent a lot of time during the pandemic reflecting on what they really wanted to do. They were kind of faced with this idea of life or death, and they thought, it's now or never. So there was a little bit of an added momentum there to do it. 2, there was unprecedented fiscal support. So I think we've had something like $5 trillion of fiscal support from the federal government. And that has also made things a little bit less burdensome for people who might want to dip into their savings. So we actually know that people actually have more savings now. Something like $2 trillion extra dollars are sitting in Americans' pockets. Of course, it's not evenly distributed in all pockets. But there is extra money there, and that's giving people a little bit of a sense of being bolder for striking out on their own and doing something entrepreneurial. And then here's the last 2 things. We also saw that people had a desire for additional flexibility. And the entrepreneurial model gives you a lot of control and flexibility. And then finally, with unemployment rising so high, there just was a lower hurdle, if you will, a lower risk to trying something on your own. You may as well go for it. So all these factors together added up to a real renaissance of entrepreneurial activity and the creator economy. And we saw all of this just accelerate in our data on LinkedIn alone. This is the last thing I'll say, Caroline, I'll turn it back to you. On LinkedIn alone, we saw something like 36% increase in the formation of companies by members on our platform. It's huge.
Right.
We saw women outpacing men in terms of founding their own company.
Right.
Also really interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to cut you off when you're talking about women
No, you
founding
go.
businesses,
You go.
Karen. So,
I'm
so that
done.
was a hard one for me to cut you off of. You mentioned the high unemployment that we saw at some points during this pandemic, but of course now we're facing this tight labor market. I think I read just yesterday that for every job that's open, there are for every job listing, there's about 7 people who could fill that job right now. What's going on with this great reshuffle of talent that we're seeing right now, particularly as the labor market is so tight and people are just quitting their jobs right now in search of new opportunities that offer that flexibility that you mentioned?
We're seeing, and by the way, it's somewhat of a global story, but I'm going to stick to the American story here. We're definitely seeing quits running well above average. And by average, I mean the pre-pandemic average. So I think we've now had 4 to 5 months of quits running above that 3.5 million Americans each month might quit their job. We're now, over 4 million every month. We just had the latest data. And over time, what that means is there's just every month an extra 500,000 million workers who are quitting their job. And it reflects a couple of things. One, workers are operating under the expectation that they can find another job and maybe even a better job. So that's one thing that we're really excited about. And that's actually true because when you look at job openings, what you see is that people are indeed offering a lot more jobs. Jobs have doubled on our platform just in the past year. Two, we're seeing a huge shift in the bargaining power of workers.
Right.
So workers are now able to kind of push back a little bit, or job seekers, I should say, can push back a little bit and ask for things that really are important to them: flexibility, wage increases, opportunities for career advancement. And we're seeing all that in terms of promotion rates that have accelerated, wages that are going up, and more desire for remote. And so what does that all mean? Well, what it means, honestly, is that there might be a labor shortage, but there might not, because it depends on what part of the economy you're looking at. There's definitely a hard to find hunt for talent going on in service sector work, in hourly work, frontline work. It's less of a story in the white collar space. There's more just people quitting and then willing to pick up a job in another industry, another role.
Right. Well, Karen, you mentioned those promotion rates. I do have to say that our latest slice of LinkedIn data shows that promotion rates for women are up in 2021 too, which is another silver lining of this year. Karen, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I always appreciate your insights so much, and I can't wait to see you next time.
Thanks, Caroline.
All right, that was Karen Kimbrough. She's chief economist for us here at LinkedIn. And before I bring on our next guest, we want to hear from you. What big ideas do you have looking into next year? What are your big ideas for 2022? Let us know in the stream and we'll get to those and we'll bring them into the show at some point in the next guest, when we bring on the next guest. All right, let's talk to one of our big ideas contributors now, Stuart Butterfield. He's the CEO and co-founder of Slack. That's a business communication platform, in case you're not on it. He also co-founded Flickr and was the senior director of product management at Yahoo. He received his master's of philosophy at the University of Cambridge. Stuart, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. Where are you coming to us from? That looks like a really pretty background behind you.
This is Manhattan.
Oh,
believe it or not, yeah, West Village.
Well, this is actually our first day back in the office of the Empire State Building filming, although you're with us remotely. So we're talking some about that in terms of the return to office. But Stuart, the reason we wanted to bring you on is your business touches so much of what the future of work is going to look like. So we wanted to bring you on to get your take on what's happening moving into 2022. But before we get there, I wanted to just talk to you as a leader. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced moving this flexible workplace environment into Slack as soon as the pandemic started? Oh.
I apologize. Microphone off.
No worries.
I guess I got to say the uncertainty. So obviously not something that we were expecting or planning for, and no rule book. I'm one of those people who, if you asked me in February of 2020, could the whole company just start working from home remotely in a heartbeat and then continue to be as productive? I would have said no. So, I was definitely wrong about that. And the adrenaline for the first couple of months really helped. I think, collectively, not just across Slack employees, but just across citizens generally, there was this real will to help. People wanted to volunteer. They were donating, trying to keep their local restaurants open and feeding frontline workers and all kinds of stuff like that. But there was this enormous uncertainty. And I guess the challenge internally was really, some people were kind of not so affected one way or the other. Some people actually almost instantaneously had an improvement in the quality of their life. Like, they had an hour and 15-minute commute before. They have a comfortable home. They got to stay home. They didn't have to commute. They liked their families. They got to spend more time together. And at the other end of the spectrum, there were people on the team who were just in impossible situations, single parents with no childcare, no school, no ability to visit grandparents. And the unequal distribution of the impact was really, I think, a bit of a cultural struggle. The good news, I guess, or the thing that mitigated that a little bit for people in positions of leadership was the camaraderie. And people, I think, are really brought together when there's a collective trauma or struggle in situations like that.
Stuart, it's interesting to me that you said that if you had asked you before this pandemic if flexible work could happen overnight or if it would work for Slack, you would be hesitant to say that. That's surprising to me, just given what Slack does and Slack's focus on digital communication. If you can, bear with me, putting the pandemic aside, what were some of your hesitancies around flexible work, remote work prior to this crisis?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I really feel like it was probably just the habit. And what's funny is there's 8 of us who started working on Slack in the first place, from the early ideas, first line of code. 1 person was in New York, 3 were in Vancouver, British Columbia, including me, and 4 were in San Francisco. So we were a distributed team from the beginning. I guess we didn't think about it as working remotely because 2 of us came to the office in Vancouver, like a tiny little office that we shared. The 4 people in San Francisco went to an office. As we got bigger, of course, we opened offices around the world. At the time the pandemic started, I think we probably had like 12 to 15 offices in 9 or 10 different countries. And it was just the familiarity, the habit. This is the way that it was always done. We had some individual workers who were remote, but I guess the trust that they had established and the relationships they had established with the people on their team who are kind of physically located in the office helped make that relatively easy. But I don't know. I mean, we were just wrong.
You're wrong. Well, the pandemic changed a lot of the ways that leaders are thinking about leading through this pandemic. But I wanted to ask you about digital communication. What have you seen as the biggest shifts in terms of how people are communicating in this hybrid remote environment, particularly when you think about knowledge workers who are now using Slack for, at least in my case, a lot of my day-to-day communication?
I think it's there's a little bit of a mixed bag. So I mean, obviously the one that is foremost in the minds of most people, even people who are enthusiastic, hardcore users of Slack, is how much time we're spending on video calls. And there's an element of that, which is if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all we have is 30-minute Zoom calls, then the world is suddenly filled with these opportunities to have a 30-minute call. And I think one of the difficulties there was in the office days, I could just get up spontaneously, walk over to someone's desk and have a 90-second conversation. We kind of figured out whatever we needed to figure out. The risk is when you get so overscheduled, it'll be, okay, we can't have a 30-minute slot until next Tuesday or something like that. But someone made this comparison once. If my commute normally takes me 45 minutes, but today traffic was great and it took me 25 minutes, I don't just sit in my car in the driveway for the extra 20 minutes. I just go inside. 30-minute meetings sometimes, but very, very rarely end early, even though there might have only been, like 11 minutes of required conversation. So, I think that's the one that's most obviously manifest. On the kind of positive side, I think people have increased the amount of discipline they have about written communication. The idea of editing for concision and clarity has become more important. Kind of shared development of artifacts, whether that's a document that people are editing or a Slack channel where the conversation is all archived and recorded, or anything else, have been a real improvement. And at Slack, both as the people at the company trying to operate our business and as the people creating the product, we've been really searching for ways to take processes that today must be done synchronously and make them asynchronous. So can we get rid of this daily stand-up meeting and have people record short video clips, updates, and post them into channel? That kind of thing.
Well, I know I speak for a lot of people in the stream, Stuart, when I say everyone's probably everything positive when it comes to making less meetings on everyone's calendar. So that's good. Stuart, let's jump into our big ideas list of 2022. I want to get your take on some of our top predictions. One of them, probably no surprise to you, is that the 4-day work week will become a competitive advantage. I know that you recently said that the 9 to 5 is no more, and that Slack is actually experimenting with some core hours where they're asking employees to be on and responding to Slacks. But what do you think about this 4-day work week? Do you think it's going to catch on next year?
I think some variation of it. And, we've been talking about this a lot internally. And is what we want, like, just working fewer hours? I mean, in some sense, yes, everyone would like to have more time for leisure, or spending time with their kids or whatever. Or is it more about reducing the window of social expectations around when you're working? Because the reality is, for most people, certainly in more senior positions, it's not unusual after the kids go to bed, it's 8:30, something like that. You spend an hour responding to messages or creating presentations. If you have a board meeting on a Monday, you're going to spend Sunday afternoon doing it. But if I was going to invite you to, like, hey, we need to talk, and it's 7:30 p.m., I would apologize. And that would, it's like an imposition to do that, or to ask you to do something on a Saturday. Can we make it so, like, Monday to Thursday is the time where people are kind of expected or required to be around, or maybe even shorten the hours during that day? Because people have always gone to the dentist at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday when they need to, and made up that work another time. What we found as individuals in the pandemic is, holy smokes, this flexibility is super valuable to me. And if we could just reduce the number of kind of scheduled meetings and make more of those conversations ad hoc or asynchronous, it's pretty great. It's wonderful to be able to kind of not feel like there's this really intense pressure between work and outside life responsibilities.
Stuart, it's funny that you mentioned the dentist. My dentist is like 2 blocks from here, from the Empire State Building. But since I'm spending less time here, I'm looking for a new dentist. So if you're joining us in the stream and know a good dentist in New Jersey, let me know. But Stuart, I think what's so interesting about what you just said is that you just talked about how senior leaders in particular are used to working these odd hours, particularly late at night. But your own data from Future Forum shows that some senior leaders, your CEOs of like, are the ones who are most resistant to this new flexible work model. What's going on here? Why that disconnect?
I think, probably going back to your first question and my first answer, it's the uncertainty, the unfamiliarity, and kind of the ingrained habits. I think I wouldn't say that the debate certainly isn't as polarized as American politics, but there is this back and forth between people who think, like, we're never going back to the office, none of that's ever going to happen, and a contingent of people who either believe that we're all going back to the office, or they're, like, caricatured as believing. I was talking to David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and he's kind of like almost the poster child for everyone's going to go back to the office. He actually has some really good points, and that's that we have 5,000 interns who start every summer. And what's the Goldman Sachs intern experience if you don't ever go to the office, if everyone's remote? How do the new kind of class of junior associates who are hired full-time get to know each other and build these relationships? I think it really speaks to the we're human, we're biological animals. We do have the social need to be able to get together. I think being together in person is a much more effective and efficient way to build trust in these relationships. But we don't need to be there 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and we don't need to commute an hour and a half each way. And we certainly didn't ever, I guess, need to travel as much for business for all of those, essentially flying to Europe for what amounts to a 60-minute meeting. My hope, and I tend to be an optimist, is that we're really good about taking this opportunity to rethink, to reimagine, because against the backdrop of so much change, people are much more tolerant and accepting. And I've always loved that phrase, never waste a crisis. So we should not waste this one.
Well, speaking of not wasting a crisis, another one of our predictions that I wanted to get your take on is hustle culture, which, tech for better or for worse, is seen as the culprit of bringing this back. And we're saying that hustle culture is going to come back with a vengeance. The take here is, after 2 years of a pandemic, people are going to want to start working harder, working longer hours, and maybe talking about it on Twitter. I don't know. But what's your take in terms of where hustle culture is going to take us moving into next year?
Yeah, this one, maybe there's some nuance, but I think I probably just respectfully disagree. There's these conversations that people had where it's like, okay, we're going to go back into the office 2 days a week. First of all, that presupposes that everyone lives within commuting distance of the office, and you kind of lose out twice in that sense, because for employees, there's this whole world of flexibility that's not available to them if that's the case. And for the employers, you miss out on all this talent and people who live in locations where you don't have an office. But part of the problem with the we'll go to the office 2 days a week thought is that I think when people say that, they imagine it's a reduction. Like 5 days a week is the benchmark, but we're going to go down to it's only 2. In fact, 0 days is now the benchmark. Like we've habituated to that. So 2 is almost an infinite increase. And I think that will be felt as an imposition. I don't mean that people are going to be lazy or there's going to be a lack of diligence or anything like that. But I'm definitely a believer that we could get the same amount done in less time with more effective collaboration. Kind of unsurprising that I would say that, selling software that supports collaboration, but forget Slack, forget any of the software tools. The kind of percentage of our resources that are effectively deployed towards reaching our objectives is really tiny. If you made the, granted, unfair comparison to like a professional sports team or something, it takes us months, and I'm sure it takes you months just to figure out what the objectives are for next year. Like even just listing out like what we're supposed to accomplish next year is a process that takes months. And if we can get better at that kind of stuff, I think there won't be a need for 15-hour days. But
sir, the main question is, we can get the same amount done, but can we get the same amount done without tweeting about it, particularly in the tech industry, or what do you think? Maybe we can get more done?
I don't, I've been an enthusiastic user of Twitter for 14 years now, but really the last year, too many people pay attention to what I say, and I liked it just to be fun and funny. So now it's a drag.
It's a nuisance. We should take that commentary over to LinkedIn. People will care about what you say, but they might be a little bit nicer. We'll see. All right, let's take a look at this next prediction, which I definitely want to get your take on, which is this theme of entrepreneurship and the changing face of entrepreneurship. So venture capital dollars, I don't have to tell you, continue to go mainly to white male founders, but we're seeing more diverse leaders start companies. How do we get the money to move where these founders are, Stuart? What are you seeing in terms of this on the entrepreneurship front?
Well, I think there's a bunch of natural trends that are really supporting that. So I feel like that's really positive. One of them is the increased willingness to invest outside of the Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, that's been a multi-decade trend, but it's certainly accelerated during the pandemic. A lot of, even if they're the prototypical Stanford comp sci grad, white male, 26-year-old founder or something like that, the fact that they want to live somewhere else and they are hiring a group of people who are more remote, I think in the end pushes the boundaries of what people find acceptable in a way that's really positive for broader populations. But even setting that aside, like the as opposed to the money coming into these businesses, the required money going out is just continuing to fall. I mean, I'm not sure, I don't have the stats, but I'm sure that the cost of underlying cost of hardware for something like Slack, which is this enormous service, bigger than Twitter, which most people don't know, 300,000 messages a second delivered at peak times. The cost of the hardware there has gone down like 80%, maybe even 90% since the time when we first got started. If you're going to be a retailer, you can just like press a button and Shopify gives you 98% of the software you would have had to created to be an e-commerce player. There's all these incredible ways to reach audiences. So I think that will be a huge democratizing force as well, because the cost to start up a company is just, it's a tiny percentage of what it used to be, no matter whether you're looking at like the inputs, the cost of goods, the cost of getting distribution, the cost of reaching the audience, the cost of fulfillment. And I think that's a huge positive. I mean, it'll just lead to more creativity, more inclusivity, and more interesting stuff happening.
I certainly hope you're right. Well, let's talk about the cost. Speaking of the cost of Slack's business, let's get to your big idea for 2022, which has to do with this idea of a digital HQ. And Stuart, I'm going to have you break that down for us, because I don't think a lot of people in the stream know what a digital HQ is. But your big idea is that a digital HQ is a better HQ. What is a digital HQ, and why do more companies need to start adopting them?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. This over the last, I'm not sure exactly how long, but a couple decades, we've actually all switched from a mode where digital technologies supplement in-person collaboration and communication as the means of facilitating productivity, accomplishing things together, to the other way around. The in-person supplements the digital. I don't think we noticed when I said a couple times earlier that I was wrong. I'm sure that over the last decade, I've spent 10 times as much effort on real estate budget, leases, sublets.
I'm gonna interrupt you right there, Stuart, because I read that this morning on LinkedIn. And how did you, a tech founder who prominently his product is software, spend more time on that stuff than on the digital components? That surprised me.
It's the habits. But here's the way to think about it. If in some other weird parallel universe, instead of offices being taken away and business travel being taken away and in-person meetings being taken away in March of 2020, you could still travel, you could still go to the office, you could still get together in person, but you took away all the software. Like all these businesses would just disintegrate. Like they wouldn't survive 48 hours. They would totally cease to exist and go out of business. So everyone already has a digital HQ, I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. It's the thing that connected us and allowed us to remain or even become more productive over this last 18 months than we were before. And I think it's really important because there's a taking for granted because it's intangible, because it's, you walk into the lobby of an office, there's like all this physical sensory experience, and then there's like power in having a glass tower with your logo on the side of it, and all of the software that supports all that kind of digital infrastructure that supports productivity and collaboration is so far in the background, and yet it's really important. People talk about Steve Jobs, I want to design the Pixar cafeteria so people have to like randomly walk into each other. Very few executives spend anything like that kind of time, creativity, effort around what tools we're using. But it turns out that most of the office time was just people sitting at their desk by themselves, using their laptops and not talking to anyone. And we could have done that from anywhere, always. It took the pandemic for us to discover that. But there's still something connecting us. There's still something facilitating that productivity. There's still something kind of undergirds that the organization, and that's the digital HQ.
So really reversing the paradigm in terms of if we're thinking digital or footprint first. That's going to be interesting moving into next year. Stuart, this has been an awesome conversation. Before I let you go, really quickly, I need to squash a debate that I'm having with my coworkers right now. More Slack channels or fewer Slack channels in terms of digital communication? Before you start, I just want to know where I'm leaning here. Sometimes I feel like every time a new project comes up, every time a new email comes up, it's like, let's start a new Slack channel. How many is too many? How many Slack channels are you in?
I might be the wrong person to ask because I'm probably in like a couple thousand.
Oh, okay. That's too many.
Here's the thing, though. It's like I think we at Slack need to do a much better job at helping people make the not quite culture, but like setting the right expectations to allow people to be most effective. Because I'll do this super quick. If you mention someone on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, it causes a notification to them, and subsequent messages in that conversation they'll also get a notification about. That's how Slack works as well. When we designed it, we all just had this assumption that everyone will always mention someone's name if this topic requires their attention. So when I come back to Slack and there's 100 channels that have unread activity, but only 3 of them have the little red bubble next to them, I just check those 3. The other 97, when I feel like catching up, when I have a question, when I have an update, I'll open that channel. Most people don't have that expectation ingrained. So when they come back and they see 100 channels with unread activity, they're like, dang, I better read every single one of these because who knows what's going to be important to me. And that is just completely overwhelming. So I think I don't want to split the difference too much, but more channels is better, but definitely more discipline around managing notifications and supporting one another, and also more discipline about archiving them as soon as they've lost their utility.
Yes, that is good. More discipline, but maybe more channels. I'll give that a thanks. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn News Live and for your contributions to our big ideas this year.
All right.
That was Stuart Butterfield. He's co-founder and CEO of Slack. I want to thank him for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. And I also want to thank you in the stream for all your comments. You can continue the conversation as well as check out all the big ideas for 2022 by checking out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. All right, next Monday, my colleague Nina Melendez will be with you for a conversation about cybersecurity. She's speaking with a former FBI agent about how to protect your identity and money this holiday season. Very important. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks for watching LinkedIn News Live.